On with my book review, the second part, Economics for Dummies by Professor Flynn. I've taken this book from the library's second edition, and I was reading the introduction, and continuing on with the introduction, I read, "This book contains core ideas and concepts that economists agree are true and important." And he writes, "I try to steer clear of fads or ideas that foster a lot of disagreement." And within parentheses, he writes, tongue-in-cheek, "If you want to be subjected to my opinions and pet theories, you will have to buy me a drink." Which means go get this book, buy it. Conventions used in this book. Economics is full of two things you may not find very appealing: jargon and algebra. To minimize confusion, wherever I introduce a new term, I put it in italics and follow it closely within an easy-to-understand definition. Also, whenever I bring algebra into the discussion, I use those handy italics again to let you know that I'm referring to a variable. For instance, I indicates investment, so you may see a sentence like this one: "I think that investment is too big." I try to keep equations to a minimum, but sometimes they help make things clearer. In such instances, I sometimes have to use several equations one after another. To avoid confusion about which equation I'm referring to at any given time, I give each equation a number, which I put in parentheses. For example, and for the example, he has given an equation, puts them in parentheses, and he writes, "Finally, the following conventions are used throughout the text of all for dummies books to make things consistent and easy to understand." All web addresses appear in this font, he writes, and bold is used to highlight the action parts of numbered steps. What you're not to read, he writes. The whole point of a For Dummies book is to give you quick access to the essentials, so you don't have to wade through a bunch of stories, factoids, and anecdotes. On the other hand, sometimes stories, factoids, and anecdotes can be both fun and enlightening. Consequently, I've clearly identified all the skippable material. This information is a stuff that, although interesting and related to the topic at hand, isn't essential for you to know. Text in the sidebars. The sidebars are shaded boxes that share interesting stories and observations but aren't necessary reading. Next is anything with a technical stuff icon attached. This information is interesting but not critical to your understanding of what's being explained. The next is a stuff on the acknowledgement speech. Unless you're one of my friends who needs an ego stroke, there's nothing here for you. Naturally, I'd like to believe that you'll choose to read everything I've written, but don't worry, I'll never know. Foolish assumptions. I wrote this book assuming some things about you. 1, he says, you're sharp, thoughtful, and interested in how the world works. 2nd, you're a high school or a college student trying to flesh out what you're learning in class, or you are a citizen of the world who realizes that the learning in class who realizes that a good grounding in economics will help you understand everything from business and politics to social issues like poverty and environmental degradation. And thirdly, you want to know some economics, but you're also busy leading a very full life. Consequently, although you want the crucial facts, you don't want to have to read through a bunch of minutiae to find them. He writes. Fourthly, writes, you're not totally intimidated by numbers, facts, and figures. Indeed, you welcome them because you like to have things proven to you instead of taking them on faith because some pinhead with a PhD says so. Next he writes, you like learning why as well as what. That is, you want to know why things happen and how they work instead of just memorizing factoids. Now, how this book is organized. This book is divided into 5 parts to make the material easier to understand and access in this section. In this section, I explain what you have to look forward to in each of these parts. Let's take part 1, Economics, the science of how people deal with scarcity. Economics is all about how people deal with scarcity, which is a situation that occurs when all the quantities of goods and services that are available for consumption are less than the amounts that people desire to consume. There's never enough time and there's limited supply of natural resources such as oil and iron. Consequently, people have to be clever about getting the most out of life, choosing wisely about what to do with the limited resources they are given. Part 1 explains how people go about dealing with scarcity and how scarcity forces people to make trade-offs in most specific situations. Then you come to part 2. Part 2, Microeconomics, the theories of consumer and firm behavior. Microeconomic theory attempts to understand and predict the behavior of individual people, that individual firms. It studies what motivates them and how they act to achieve their goals given the constraints they face. In this part, you discover what motivates firms to produce output, how buyers and sellers interact in markets to allocate that output, and how markets can break down and do perverse things if not properly managed. He goes on to write that in part 2 you also explore how consumer decisions about what goods and services to purchase and in which quantities to purchase them are driven by a desire on the part of consumers to maximize the total amount of utility or satisfaction that they can get from their limited budgets. I also delve into the details of supply and demand, competition, monopolies, and Adam Smith's invisible hand. So yeah, it's very interesting. So here he'll talk about goods and services to purchase and in which quantities to purchase them are driven by the desire on the part of the consumers to maximize the total amount of utility or satisfaction that they can get from their limited budgets. He also writes that I delve into the details of supply and demand, competition, monopolies, and Adam Smith's invisible hand. Coming to part 3, applying the theories of microeconomics. In this part, I present 3 chapters that show how well microeconomic theory can illuminate many real-world behaviors. Among other things, you explore why health insurance costs so much, why it's so difficult to find a quality used car, and how a few simple changes in the way property rights are defined and enforced can mean the difference between extinction and survival for many species of wild animals as well as entire rainforests and other ecosystems. Macroeconomics, the science of economic growth and stability. Macroeconomics views the economy from on high at the national or international level. It deals with the choices countries face about economic growth and development, as well as choices about how to best manage their economies to avoid recessions. It also deals with the misery caused by unemployment and inflation. In this part, you find out about monetary and fiscal policy, the Federal Reserve, the effects of taxation on the economy and international trade and trade policy. In part 5 we write, for every Dummies book ends with top 10 lists that are both helpful and fun. In this part I give you 10 economic ideas to hold dear, 10 false economic assertions that are repeated all the time in the media and by politicians, and 10 ways to become a better economist. And he talks about icons used in this book. You can see them. One is, the hand is there for remember. To make this book easier to read and simpler to use, I include a few icons that can help you find and fathom key ideas and information. This remember, or the hand, this icon alerts you that I'm explaining a fundamental economic concept or fact. It saves you the time and effort of marking the book with a highlighter. Real world example is with a world map. Economics is chock full of theories, and sometimes it's helpful to kick those theories out into the real world and see how they actually work. This icon alerts you to the presence of a helpful real world example. Then there's another icon, the technical stuff. This icon tells you that the ideas and information that it accompanies are a bit more technical or mathematical than other sections of the book. This information can be interesting and informative, but I've designed the book so that you don't need to understand it to get the big picture about what's going on. Feel free to skip the stuff. Then the other one is tip. This icon points out time and energy savers. I place this icon next to suggestions for ways to do or think about things that can save you some effort. Then you have what is warning. Kaboom. This icon discusses any troublesome areas in economics you need to know. Keep an eye open for them to alert you of potential pitfalls. So after you go through the book, he writes, where to go from here. This book is set up so that you can understand what's going on even if you skip around. The book is also divided into independent parts so that you can, for instance, read all about microeconomics without having to read anything about macroeconomics. The table of contents and index can help you find specific topics easily. But hey, if you don't know where to begin, just do the old-fashioned thing and start at the beginning. Interesting. It's a must-read. It's a nice book to have in your own personal library. There are new editions, I'm sure. It's a book that you must have, or at least you must read. So the back cover is written, go to dummies.com for videos, step-by-step examples on how to articles or to shop. This is it. The ISBN number is 978-0-470-87948-1.